Picture the scene. The Third Reich is crumbling. A once mighty war beast reduced to rubble and dust. The Allies have stormed in. The swastika's a fading nightmare. And the world's catching its breath after years of carnage. But as the victory flags wave, a new battle's brewing. A shadowy standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. A Cold War where the prize isn't land, but mines. In Germany's wreckage, the US spots a treasure trove. The brilliant architects of Hitler's arsenal, rocket builders, chemical wizards, men who turned science into slaughter. Why let them slip away? These weren't just brainy bystanders. They'd masterminded weapons that rained hell on cities, gases that could choke entire armies. The US couldn't resist. The Soviets were circling too, and losing this talent could tip the scales toward disaster. What if I told you these men, some with blood-soaked hands from concentration camps, were given new lives, new jobs, even new identities? That's Operation Paperclip, a covert mission so bold it defies belief, yet it's etched in history's underbelly. It started as a whisper called Operation Overcast, named for the paperclips pinning the files of the Nazis deemed too valuable to lose. Soon it grew into something bigger, darker. A full-on recruitment drive that pulled these scientists out of Germany's ruins and planted them in America's labs. They weren't random picks. Think Werner von Braun, the V-2 rocket genius who'd later send us to the moon. Or Hubertus Strughold, whose experiments left bodies in Dachau's wake. The US knew their pasts. Files brimmed with Nazi affiliations, war crimes, but the Cold War's chill outweighed any pang of conscience. This wasn't a sloppy grab. It was a deliberate choice, a pact forged in the name of survival. The Soviets were snatching their own batch of German minds, and the US couldn't afford to lag. National security became the excuse, a blanket draped over the ugliness of it all. Critics howled. Albert Einstein himself penned a letter to President Truman, calling it a betrayal of humanity. But the gears kept turning. These men went from building Hitler's terror to shaping America's future, their sins swept under a rug of pragmatism. We're tearing that rug up today. The masterminds, the deal, the fallout, the world that birthed it, and the questions it leaves us. Let's dive in. Let's step into the spotlight with the masterminds, the Nazi scientists who traded swastikas for stars in America's sky. This tale isn't about a fleeting spasm of brilliance gone wrong. It's about men who built a war machine with chilling intent, only to find redemption, or at least a paycheck, in the land of the free. These weren't accidental villains. They knew exactly what they were doing, and the US gave them a second act. First up, Werner von Braun, the poster boy of this twisted drama. A young dreamer turned rocket maestro, he joined the Nazi cause early, slipping into the party's ranks and later donning an SS uniform. His masterpiece? The V-2 rocket, Vergeltungswaffe II, Vengeance Weapon II, a sleek harbinger of death that screamed across the sky to pound Allied cities like London and Antwerp. Picture it, civilians ducking as these missiles streaked in. No warning, just destruction. Von Braun wasn't tinkering in a vacuum. He ran the show at Peenemünde, a coastal fortress where the V-2 took shape. But the real horror was underground, at Mittelwerk, a factory carved into Nordhausen's rock, where slave laborers from Dora camp toiled in inhuman misery. Starved, beaten, worked to death. These prisoners built his rockets, and von Braun wasn't blind. He handpicked workers from Buchenwald, saw the suffering, yet kept the machines humming. Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down, he'd later quip. Not his department, he claimed. When the Reich fell, von Braun didn't face a noose. He got a ticket to America. Operation Paperclip swooped in, and soon he's at Fort Bliss, then Huntsville, turning V-2s into Redstone rockets. His big moment? The Saturn V. Towering, majestic, the beast that carried Apollo 11 to the moon. By the time Neil Armstrong stepped onto lunar soil, von Braun was a national hero, chatting with Walt Disney on TV. A far cry from the Mittelwerk tunnels. His Nazi past? A footnote, scrubbed clean by the US. A scientist too brilliant to punish. Then there's Arthur Rudolph, von Braun's right hand at Mittelwerk. Production manager, his job was keeping those V2s rolling, no matter the cost. Under his watch, workers endured brutality that defies words. Starvation, lashings, death as routine as clockwork. No exaggeration could capture it. Survivors spoke of a living hell, and Rudolph walked those tunnels, eyes open. Paperclip brought him over, and he climbed the ladder at NASA, co-designing the Saturn V that made history. For years, he basked in glory, medals, praise, until the 80s when his war crimes resurfaced. Forced to ditch his US citizenship, he slipped back to Germany, escaping the justice he'd dodged for decades. A hero built on horrors, America didn't flinch. Hubertus Strughold's story cuts deeper. Aviation medicine was his game. Luftwaffe's research chief, a title that cloaked a grim reality. At Dachau, his team ran experiments, prisoners frozen in icy vats, locked in pressure chambers till their lungs gave out. Lethal, cruel, deliberate. He didn't wield the tools, but he steered the science. Paperclip plucked him out, landing him at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There he became father of space medicine, crafting life support systems for astronauts. Gemini, Apollo, all owed him a nod. His name graced awards until the truth crept out. No formal SS badge, but a past too dark to ignore. Still, he died celebrated, his atrocities a whisper. Kurt Blom, biological warfare's shadow. Deputy Surgeon General for the Reich, he oversaw tests at Dachau, cancer experiments on humans, Himmler's grim pet project. Nuremberg nabbed him, war crimes on the table, but the US stepped in and he walked free. Soon he's at Fort Detrick, tinkering with germs for America's arsenal. Otto Ambros, chemical death's architect, rounds it out. I.G. Farben's star, he brewed sarin and tabun, nerve agents poised to kill millions if unleashed. His Auschwitz-Monowitz plant ran on slave labor. Workers dropped dead by the thousands. Nuremberg gave him 7 years. Paperclip cut it short, planting him at Edgewood Arsenal to perfect U.S. chemical weapons. A pardon later, he faded into obscurity. A war criminal turned asset. These men weren't bit players. They were the Reich's intellectual spine, turning labs into killing fields. Rockets that terrorized, gases that threatened, experiments that broke bodies. They did it with purpose. America took them in, not out of mercy, but calculation. From Mittelwerk's tunnels to NASA's launch pads, their brilliance outshone their sins, at least in the eyes of those calling the shots. Now the deal. The pact that traded justice for a fistful of rockets. This reckoning pulls back the curtain on how Operation Paperclip came to be. Not a rash grab, but a deliberate bargain with the past. It's a story of shadowy figures, hushed agreements, and a moral line crossed in the name of power. The Reich's collapse sets it off, a once mighty war machine crumbling to ash. The Allies swarm in, hunting war criminals. But there's a twist. They're also chasing Germany's brightest minds. Why? These scientists held secrets, rockets that could strike from afar, chemicals that could wipe out armies, tech that could shift the world's balance. The US and Soviet Union lock eyes across the ruins, a Cold War brewing before the ink's dry on peace. America's not about to let the Soviets claim this prize. National security's the rallying cry, and ethics take a back seat. It starts as Operation Overcast, a quiet plan to snag a handful of scientists. Soon, it's Paperclip, named for the clips pinning the files of Nazis too valuable to lose. The U.S. Army's in deep. Teams scour Germany's wreckage, raiding labs, bunkers, snatching blueprints and brainiacs alike. Werner von Braun surrenders, his crew in tow, and the deal's on. Truman gives the nod, not loudly, but in shadows, saying yes to men the Nuremberg trials should have hanged. The State Department balks, laws ban Nazis, but the military rigs it, rewriting histories, bleaching out the swastikas. The CIA steps in, freshly minted in '47, and takes the reins. Allen Dulles, a spy master from the OSS days, drives it hard. He's no bleeding heart. Dulles sees the Soviet threat, knows the KGB's snatching talent, too. "We're in a secret war," he'd say, "and these Nazis are the ammo." John McCloy, High Commissioner in Germany, smooths the path, negotiating deals to dodge trials. James Jesus Angleton, CIA counterintelligence guru, keeps watch. Paranoid about Soviet moles, he tracks these newcomers like hawks. Reinhard Galen's the wild card, Nazi intel chief turned U.S. asset. His network becomes the Galen Organization, a Cold War spy ring under American wings. This isn't chaos, it's a machine. Ships ferry them over. Fort Bliss, White Sands, Huntsville, labs spring to life. Von Braun's tinkering rockets, Strughold's plotting space survival, Ambrose's mixing chemicals, all for Uncle Sam. The Soviets grab their share, and the race is on. Who'll outthink, outbuild, outlast? It's not about passion, it's survival, and the U.S. bets big, turning war criminals into saviors. Critics scream, Eleanor Roosevelt calls it a disgrace. Einstein begs Truman to stop, but the deal's sealed. These men aren't just forgiven, they're celebrated, their pasts buried under a pile of need to know. It's a pact with the devil, deliberate as daylight, and it's about to pay off in ways no one saw coming. Now we reach the fallout. The sprawling, tangled aftermath of Operation Paperclip, where Nazi scientists became America's heroes while their horrors stayed buried in the shadows. This isn't a quick wrap-up into how the U.S. hid their pasts, reaped their brilliance, and wrestled with the truth when it finally clawed its way out. These men didn't stumble into glory. It was a deliberate transformation, and the consequences stretched far beyond the labs they worked in. Let's peel it back, layer by layer, and see what this pact really unleashed. The cover-up kicked off the moment they stepped onto American soil. Picture it, Werner von Braun, the V2 mastermind, fresh from Germany's ruins, strolling into Fort Bliss like a visiting scholar. No SS badge, no whiff of Mittelwerk's blood-soaked tunnels. His file? Scrubbed clean, those pesky Nazi affiliations. The slave labor he oversaw, all erased with a flick of bureaucratic magic. Hubertus Strughold, the Dachau experimenter, lands at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. His dossier paints him as a medical visionary, not a man who signed off on freezing prisoners to death. Arthur Rudolph, Mittelwerk's taskmaster, gets the same treatment. His resume now reads rocket engineer, not overseer of starvation and beatings. The Army and CIA didn't miss a beat. Files were rewritten, identities polished, and the public got a fairy tale. These were German experts, brilliant minds here to save the day. Not war criminals with hands still dirty from the Reich. It wasn't sloppy, it was surgical. The JEOA, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, orchestrated it with precision, backed by Truman's quiet nod to bypass laws barring Nazis. The CIA, under Allen Dulles's sharp eye, kept the lid tight. Gag orders ensured no one spilled the beans. Von Braun's SS past? A footnote buried in classified memos. Strughold's Dachau ties? Glossed over as research too valuable to question. Rudolph's slave labor legacy? Wiped away. After all, who'd look too closely when rockets were soaring? The spin was masterful. Press releases painted them as saviors, not sinners, and the American public lapped it up. Why wouldn't they? The Cold War was heating up. The Soviets were a looming threat. And these men promised a future of strength and supremacy. The payoff was staggering, bigger than anyone could have dreamed. At White Sands, New Mexico, Those V-2 rockets, once Hitler's terror toys, lifted off American soil, streaking into the sky as proof of a new era. Von Braun didn't stop there. He took that Nazi know-how and turned it into the Redstone rocket, a hulking missile that could strike fear into Moscow's heart. Huntsville, Alabama became his kingdom. Redstone Arsenal buzzed with German accents, churning out Jupiter missiles that kept the U.S. ahead in the arms race. Then came the crown jewel, the Saturn V. Picture it, 363 feet of gleaming steel, a behemoth that roared to life and carried Apollo 11 to the moon. July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong's boots hit lunar dust, and von Braun's name shone bright, a hero etched in history. Rudolph was there too, his hands on the Saturn V's design, his Mittelwerk days a distant echo. Strughold's work paid off differently. Life support systems that kept astronauts alive, born from the same mind that once watched prisoners die in pressure chambers. The space age wasn't just a dream, it was a reality these men built. Von Braun became a celebrity. Walt Disney brought him on TV, charming families with tales of space travel, a far cry from the V-2s that smashed London flats. "Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down?" His words, a chilling shrug from a man who'd traded swastikas for stars. Rudolph basked in NASA's glow, medals pinned to his chest, a quiet man turned titan of engineering. Strughold's legacy was subtler, but just as deep. Astronauts breathed easier because of him. His father of space medicine title whispered in hushed awe. Kurt Blome and Otto Ambros worked darker corners, Fort Detrick, Edgewood Arsenal, cooking up biological and chemical tricks that kept America's arsenal sharp. The Cold War demanded it. When the Soviets launched Sputnik, a beeping orb that shook the West, Paperclip's minds struck back, proving their worth in a race that defined the century. For years, the facade held. The public saw heroes, brilliant foreigners who'd fled tyranny to build a better tomorrow. Von Braun graced magazine covers, Collier's, Life, a visionary with a twinkle in his eye. Mittelwerk's ghosts, nowhere in sight. Rudolph lived quietly, a Huntsville fixture, his NASA accolades piling up. Strughold's name adorned awards. Texas hailed him as a pioneer, his Dachau shadow tucked away. Blome and Ambros faded into military obscurity, their chemical legacies locked behind classified doors. The press caught whiffs. Articles like "Nazis in Texas" popped up, but the denials were swift, the story too wild to stick. Americans wanted to believe, needed to believe, that their triumphs were pure, untainted by the past. But secrets don't stay buried forever. They fester, they claw, they break free. The cracks started small, whispers from survivors, murmurs in Congress. By the 70s, the Freedom of Information Act pried open the vault. Linda Hunt's secret agenda hit like a bombshell, spilling names, crimes, the whole ugly truth. Von Braun's halo wobbled, his SS roll, his Buchenwald pics laid bare. He'd had died in '77, safe in his legend, but the stain crept in. Rudolph's fall was harder. '80s investigations dug up Mittelwerk's horrors, survivors' voices piercing the silence. No words could exaggerate that hell, starvation, lashings, bodies piled high, and Rudolph had walked through it, unflinching. NASA's hero faced the music. Stripped of citizenship, he fled to Germany, a quiet escape from justice he'd dodged for decades. Strughold's reckoning came later. '90s activists linked him to Dachau, his father of space medicine title tainted. Texas yanked his name from honors, a belated nod to the dead he'd left behind. Blome and Ambros stayed shadows. Fort Detrick and Edgewood kept their secrets, but Nuremberg's echoes lingered. Dora survivors sued, frail voices demanding accountability, while Auschwitz's ghosts haunted Ambros's pardon. The fallout wasn't tidy, it was messy, fractured, a slow bleed of truth. The public reeled, heroes unmasked as villains, their moonshots built on bones. NASA distanced itself, the Army shrugged, but the damage was done. This wasn't accidental. The US chose it, eyes wide open. The cover-up held for decades, fueled by Cold War panic and a hunger for victory. The triumphs were real. Apollo's glory, missiles that stared down Moscow. But the horrors were too. Von Braun's TV smiles hid Buchenwald's cries. Rudolph's medals masked Mittelwerk's graves. Strughold's breakthroughs carried Dachau's screams. The space age rose on their shoulders, a marvel of science stained by compromise. When the truth broke, it didn't topple their legacy. It complicated it, a duality America still grapples with. Heroes with hidden horrors, a deliberate legacy that outlasted the men who lived it. Let's step back, way back, into a crucible. The world in ashes that gave birth to Operation Paperclip. This isn't just a backdrop, it's the sprawling, jagged stage where the end of one war bled into the start of another, where the Third Reich's collapse set off a scramble that blurred every line between right and wrong. It's a world of ruins, rivalries, and ruthless ambition. A place where the deliberate choice to embrace Nazi scientists wasn't a fluke, but a symptom of a planet teetering on the edge. Rewind to the twilight of World War II. The glue's a battlefield. Europe's cities are husks. Asia's scarred. Millions lie dead under the weight of a conflict that's chewed through nations like a relentless beast. The Allies, America, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, have banded together to crush Hitler's dream. A war machine that once roared with terrifying precision. Picture the Reich in its prime. Tanks rolling across Poland, Luftwaffe bombers darkening the skies over London, U-boats stalking the Atlantic like wolves. It's not chaos, it's a system, built by men who turned science into slaughter, who dreamed up rockets that could strike from afar, gases that could kill silently, planes that outsped anything the Allies could muster. These weren't accidents of war. They were the product of cold, calculated minds working in labs and factories, fueled by a regime that saw humanity as expendable. Now, fast forward to the endgame. Germany's crumbling. The Reich's iron grip slips as Allied boots hit the ground. Cities like Dresden are firebombed into oblivion. February 45, a blaze that kills tens of thousands, a warning of total defeat. Berlin's a battleground. Soviet tanks rumble in from the east. American and British forces close from the west. Hitler's holed up in his bunker, a delusional shadow of the tyrant who'd once held Europe in thrall. April 30th, 1945. He puts a pistol to his head, and the Reich's heartbeat stops. May 8th, VE Day. Church bells ring, crowds cheer, but the victory's bittersweet. The swastika's down, but the world's a mess. Germany's a shattered shell, its people starving, its infrastructure dust. You who haven't seen it can't know what hell looks like from the top. That's Germany now, a graveyard of ambition. But peace doesn't settle. The ashes are still hot when a new war brews. The Allies, once united, fracture. The Soviet Union, under Stalin's iron fist, eyes the West with suspicion. America, flush with victory, senses a rival rising. It's the Cold War, not a clash of armies, but a shadow game of power, influence, and survival. The Potsdam Conference, summer '45, lays it bare. Truman, Stalin, and Churchill, soon Attlee, carve up Germany, split Berlin into zones, but trusts a ghost. Stalin's Red Army holds the East, a juggernaut that's seen the Reich's worst and wants its spoils. The US, Britain, France cling to the West, but the fault lines are already cracking. This isn't about rebuilding, it's about who'll rule the next era. In Germany's wreckage, the real prize emerges: the minds behind Hitler's war. Before the war even started, these scientists were at work. Germany's labs, like the Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes, were cradles of brilliance turned dark. Think of the Luftwaffe's jet fighters, the Me-262, streaking past Allied planes in a blur of speed. The V-1 buzz bombs, crude but deadly, buzzing over London like angry wasps. The V-2 rockets soaring high before crashing down with no warning. Chemical plants churned out Zyklon B, the gas that fueled Auschwitz's ovens, and nerve agents like sarin, stockpiled for a final blow that never came. These weren't wartime whims, they were years in the making, deliberate projects backed by Hitler's vision of a 1,000-year Reich. Peenemünde, a fortress on the Baltic, was their playground. Rockets took flight there, built by hands that would later serve America. Mittelwerk's tunnels, carved deep into rock, hid the horror. Slave laborers from camps like Dora worked to death under the gaze of men like von Braun and Rudolph. The war's brutality wasn't random either. Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, these weren't side effects. They were the Reich's backbone, feeding its war machine with forced labor and test subjects. Scientists like Hubertus Strughold turned concentration camps into labs, prisoners frozen, suffocated, dissected, all in the name of research. Kurt Blome toyed with biological nightmares, cancer tests, plague experiments, under Himmler's approving eye. Otto Ambrose's chemical empire at Auschwitz-Monowitz ran on the broken bodies of slaves, a deliberate choice to squeeze every ounce of profit and power from human suffering. This was Germany's strength, a fusion of genius and cruelty, a war machine so advanced it left the Allies scrambling to catch up. When the end came, that strength didn't vanish, it scattered. The Allies didn't just want victory, they wanted the tools that nearly won Hitler the war. Nuremberg loomed, a grand reckoning for the Reich's leaders, but justice was selective. The trials began in late '45, a spectacle of accountability, Göring, Hess, Speer facing the gallows or cells. But the scientists? They slipped through the cracks, not by accident, but by design. The US and Soviets saw the same truth. Whoever claimed these mines could claim the future. Stalin's forces swept eastern Germany, hauling away talent in a mirror operation. Osoaviakim, a mass grab that echoed Paperclip's intent. The West couldn't lag. America's A-bomb had stunned the world, but the Soviets were closing in, their own scientists racing toward the same deadly power. This world wasn't kind. It was raw, fractured, desperate. Europe's cities were rubble, London pockmarked from V2s, Warsaw leveled, Dresden a charred memory. Millions displaced, refugees fleeing Soviet advance, German civilians starving amid the chaos. The Pacific wasn't spared. Japan's surrender came after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a fiery end that shifted warfare forever. But victory didn't heal. It exposed new wounds. Britain's empire waned. France licked its wounds, and the US emerged as a titan, its industrial might unmatched, yet vulnerable. The Soviet Union, battered but vast, stretched from Berlin to Vladivostok, its ideology a red tide threatening the West's doorstep. Science became the new weapon. Before the war, Germany led, its universities, its institutes. A legacy of innovation turned to terror. The Allies had lagged. America's planes couldn't match the Me-262's speed. Its rockets were toys next to the V2. The A-bomb changed that, but it wasn't enough. The Cold War demanded more. Jets to outfly, missiles to outrange, chemicals to outkill. Germany's scientists held the keys, and they knew it. Von Braun didn't flee. He surrendered, bargaining his brilliance for a new life. Strughold, Blome, Ambrose, they waited, their skills a currency stronger than gold. The moral cost was steep, but this world didn't blink. Nuremberg hanged the loudest Nazis, but the quiet ones, the thinkers, slipped away. The US wasn't alone. Britain tested V2s in Operation Backfire. France eyed its own scraps. But America played boldest. The Cold War's chill set in fast. Berlin's blockade loomed, Korea's shadow grew, and survival trumped sentiment. Einstein pleaded for humanity, but his voice was drowned by pragmatism. This was a world in ashes, grieving, grasping, gambling on a future where Nazi sins could be bartered for supremacy. Paperclip wasn't a mistake. It was forged here, in the heat of a planet too broken to care. Time to close, the cost of victory. What did Paperclip win? What did it lose? This pact born of cold intent? The gains dazzle, moon landings, missiles, a space age sparked by Nazi hands. Von Braun's a legend, Rudolph's a hero, Strughold's a pioneer, America's edge sharpened. The Cold War demanded it. The Soviets loomed, and these men delivered. The loss? Justice. Dora's dead, Dachau's ghosts, Auschwitz's cries, all swept aside. The U.S. chose power over principle, and the fallout lingers. Rudolph's exile, von Braun's myth cracked. Einstein's right, it's a moral scar. Today, drones, AI, echoes of that choice haunt us. Was it worth it? A secret unleashed, a question unanswered. Subscribe, YouTube, Spotify. We're still chasing the truth. Secrets Unleashed, out.